Okay, so as we continue on, what we want to do is we then want to sort of do the same sort of step that we did with our pose, where we take our costume and we basically reduce the opacity on that layer. We bring it down. We do a new layer over the top of that, and we'll call this one line art. So here's our line art layer, and what we want to do at this point is we want to start to finalize what our character actually looks like. And to do that, we're going to need a nicer brush than this sort of pencil brush that we've been using. So I would go into your tool presets again, and under your sketch.tpl, go grab AAA drawer, but we're going to make some modifications to it. So if we go into our brush options, we're going to pull the spacing down to 1%, and we're going to turn the transfer off, and that'll give us a nice inked line. And that's kind of how we want everything to look as we, sort of make this look a little bit nicer. We want a nice tapered ink line. So the best way to do this, I mean, this is really just kind of a tracing and decision-making exercise, right? So we'll pull in nice and close, Control plus, Control minus, remember, and space to move everything around. And what we want to do is we want to just go ahead and on our line art, we'll start making our lines. I'm going to reduce my line size to 5 for now. And so we'll do something like this. Make sure that your lines are nice and smooth. Right, and again, this is just what purpose do lines serve as we're drawing all of these out? What purpose do lines serve? Well, lines really kind of just serve as artificial, boundaries. Don't forget to erase the parts you don't like. Go ahead and redo them, right? You want sometimes artificial boundaries so that you know kind of where to color. You want to know specifically what everything is supposed to look like. And where do things start? Where do things end? A little bit smaller. As you make like rings and circles and stuff, do your best to sort of close these in. Pretend you're making a coloring book for kids. Try and keep your lines clean, simple, and if they're not quite the way that you want them, take the time and clean them up a little bit. It's worth it. So you just go through, and I mean, some things that are difficult about doing these sorts of line drawings is like when things are sketchier, kind of like this, you sort of have to really think through exactly what you want. That can be challenging. Thinking through exactly what your folds are going to look like. But try and keep your lines long and clean. And again, if you can't get a nice long, clean line from a distance, move in a little bit closer. Take as much of the screen as you need. Don't move your wrist as you draw. Just long, smooth strokes. So I've got a band here. This leather band is going to be for this sort of belt type shape, is going to actually hold a sword. Remember, that was sort of the original idea of this character, is that he has a sword. I think at this point, this is going to be the most important thing on the character, right? This is sort of his power gauntlet, or robot hand or something like that. But people used to, of course, have ceremonial swords. They had stuff that was decorative, that sort of was meant to show status, right? And those sorts of additions can be very desirable in characters. So, if this was a real game character, I don't know that a sword would be a really great thing to have in the front here. If your character is going to be running around or something, that might be kind of a problem from a technical perspective. But for our purposes here today, what I might do is give him a sword, just to sort of show you how you would go about it, right? One of the things that is usually worthwhile is, don't do your accessories on the same layer as everything else, if you can help it. Why? Because you might actually need to have a separate layer to show a modeler exactly how an accessory is going to look, or you might need to do detail work on that item later. So what you would do in that particular case is you would do a new layer. You would call it like sword, and you would drop the line art down. Let's get rid of that for just a moment. You drop the line art down in opacity. And one thing that you could do on your sword layer, the general size of your sword. I'll turn the costume back on so that I can sort of see. All right, there's my crossbar. That's maybe a little wide. It's maybe a little short, somewhere in there. The sword is probably going to be about that big, somewhere in there, right? If you wanted, you could do symmetry, right? Turn on vertical, pull your symmetry over, right? And then you could work on, let's do a new layer above it. Right. If the sword's in a scabbard, you would need to draw the scabbard. We'll shift down for a straight line. Something like that, maybe. Okay, let's turn the symmetry off. Let's turn that sword layer off. Can do things like add gems or something like that. And then what you would do is you would Control T to transform, and you would maybe stick that guy off to the side. Something like that. This maybe looks a little high. I'd maybe bring it down a little bit. And then you have to remember how think about rather how that scabbard is going to attach. So there might be a piece of leather here with perhaps an adjustable band, and maybe that attaches to the scabbard on the sword, right? And so this would get its own inking layer, and you would actually just kind of, when you were done, you would do the sword. You would make the sword part of the character until it was time to do coloration on the sword. Then you'd pull it off to the side. You would do that separately, and then you would sort of move it back and kind of erase out the parts that would involve some overlap. So that's generally how this stuff is done. I've actually already done a sword over here and a character over here, so you can sort of see how those are put together. I've already made all of those choices, so I'm going to hide those. Right, and again, if I pull that out, you can sort of see that. So my character might look something like this. What I want to do then, I'm going to turn the sword off for right now, is I want to then make sure that every time I work with this character, when I start to do coloration, I'm not coloring outside the character and making some disastrous color choices or coloration choices where I'm coloring and everything looks sloppy. We want everything to look as neat and as tidy as possible. So what we do in that particular case is we create a layer, call it fill base. And this is basically just a tool layer. And what we do on that layer is we just go in, we take maybe a dark gray to start off with, and we just color in all of the area of our character. And we try and do this as neatly as possible. This is an exercise where you do probably want to stay within the lines. Just like that, only you do it for the whole entire figure. Top to bottom. Make it nice, okay? And then if you had a sword here, you would do the same thing for the sword, right? So if I take this, I'll turn off my auto select, and I can move it off to the side, right? I can see that item separately. Right now, again, the sword is overlapping the hand. Eventually, the hand will overlap the sword, but that is something that can be adjusted very, very easily on the other side of this. So again, why do we do this with the with this fill base? Because if I control click into that layer, right, now any sort of coloration that I do, any sort of value change that I do, will only happen on the figure, and it will never happen outside the figure. So the figure will always be clean, right? If I do another layer above this, and I do a test, right, I can make my brush as big as I want, right, and it only affects that layer. So the next part of the process is going to be going in and actually dividing out all of these different sections, and then adding things like lighting and shadow on top of them. Again, value only, no color, just like we did with our simple form character assignment. But for now, we'll leave it there. This is sort of the beginning of the line and fill, and it's kind of the beginning of the end of the design for this character. So we'll stop there.